My brother sold my childhood home while I was at work. I already owned his company wet. If your brother, someone you trusted with your life, sold your childhood home while you were at work, what if, in the process of betraying you, he unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would not only change your life, but also reveal that you already owned everything he thought he controlled? Hey, my name is Valeria. Never thought I'd come home to find my childhood home, my entire history gone. But there it was, the sign hanging on the front door, its bold letters mocking me. As though my life had been erased in an instant, I walked up to the house in a daze, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the words on the sign were unmistakable. Sold. My heart dropped. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, trembling as I unlocked the door, only to be greeted by emptiness. The house I grew up in, the walls that had held my memories, was nothing more than a shell now. All of the furniture, all of the little pieces that made it home, gone. My brother Ethan was the last person I expected to betray me. I'd trusted him with everything: family, secrets, even the future of our lives. We had both inherited this house, both promised we would take care of it, maintain it, make sure it stayed in the family for as long as we lived. Yet, standing there in the hollow quiet, it became clear Ethan had sold it without telling me, without any warning. It wasn't just a house. It was where we grew up, where we laughed, fought, and tried to survive our parents' failed marriage. The house was a symbol of everything we had survived together. But to him, it was just property, just a thing to be sold off for whatever price someone was willing to pay. I tried to call him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. My hands shook as I dialed again and again, but no answer came. I should have felt anger, and maybe I did somewhere deep inside me, but what hit me most wasn't the betrayal, it was the sharp sting of rejection. I hadn't been consulted. My opinion hadn't mattered. I wasn't part of this decision. I sat down on the floor of the empty house, feeling the weight of the silence pressing around me. This wasn't just a simple misstep. This was betrayal. It wasn't just the house, it was everything he had promised, the trust, the shared memories, the bond we were supposed to have. It was all slipping away, piece by piece, and that's when the thought hit me, a sick realization. What else has he been hiding from me? I had always known Ethan could be selfish at times, but this was too much. I had spent my entire life doing the right thing, focusing on my work, paying the bills, taking care of responsibilities, while he had followed his own path, always more carefree than I could afford to be. But I never imagined he would take something so important from me, something that couldn't be replaced. I had trusted him. I felt completely powerless. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I also knew there was nothing I could do at that moment. The house was gone. But what hurt the most was the realization that, in some twisted way, he had believed it was his decision to make. I felt a surge of something unfamiliar, something sharper than hurt, shame. Why had I been so naive to think that family would always have my back? The humiliation of it all was worse than the loss itself. I couldn't even call this a family decision. It was a decision made behind my back, without any consideration for what it meant to me. I thought about leaving, about packing up my things and walking away from everything. But I knew I couldn't. I couldn't just walk away from this betrayal, from this broken trust. Not yet. I realized, standing there in the silent shell of what used to be my home, that this was more than a family dispute. This was the beginning of something bigger, something I wasn't prepared for. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. The question nagged at me. How had I let myself get to this point? How had I allowed him to take this from me? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't let him keep doing this to me, to us. I had to find out what was really going on. And that meant facing Ethan, confronting him, and maybe discovering things I wasn't prepared to hear. I didn't know how long I sat there, in the middle of an empty house that once felt like a home. My mind was spinning, replaying the moment over and over, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How had I missed the signs? How had I not seen it coming? The more I thought about it, the more everything began to make sense, and the more it shattered me. Growing up, Ethan had always been the golden child. He was the charming one, the one who could talk his way out of anything, The one who seemed to always get what he wanted. I was the responsible one. The one who kept everything together when our parents fought, when they divorced, when life seemed to unravel around us. Ethan had the freedom to follow his whims, while I had to hold the fort. I didn't resent him for that. I thought it was just the way things were. After all, we were a family. He had his strengths, and I had mine. But looking back, I realized there had been a quiet pattern forming, a pattern of him taking what he wanted, leaving me to deal with the fallout. There had been little things over the years. When we were younger, he'd borrow money from me and never pay it back, always with a smile and a promise. When he needed a place to crash, he'd show up on my doorstep without warning, and I'd offer him a bed without hesitation. It was always me who stepped in, always me who made the sacrifice. But when I needed him, when I needed someone to lean on, when I was struggling to make ends meet, or when I felt like everything was crashing down, he wasn't there. It wasn't even the big betrayals that hurt the most. It was the small, everyday moments where I realized that I was invisible to him. Even when we were supposed to be family, he never really saw me. I had always been the one to give, to bend over backwards to keep things afloat, while he took what he could. And I had never realized it until now. As a child, I'd forgiven him, brushed off his inconsiderate actions, thinking he didn't know better. He was my little brother. I loved him. But now, as an adult, the weight of those quiet betrayals, those unspoken injustices, was unbearable. I had spent my whole life giving without question, without ever asking for anything in return. And in the end, this is what I got. I started to wonder, had I always been so invisible to him? Or was it that he just never cared enough to notice? I think I'd always believed that one day he would grow up, and that he'd change, that he'd recognize the sacrifices I had made, the way I'd always been there for him. But that day never came. Instead, I stood in the ruins of my childhood home, feeling like a stranger to the person I had once trusted most. But then came the part that really stung, the realization that I was just as complicit in my own pain. I had never stood up for myself. I had allowed him to take advantage of me, to walk all over me. And it wasn't just Ethan, it was everyone. I had always been the quiet one, the one who kept everything inside, too afraid to rock the boat or ask for what I deserved. I had let my life be defined by other people's actions, instead of standing up and defining it for myself. And now, here I was, standing in the ruins of a home that wasn't just a house, but a symbol of everything. I had been to everyone else something to be used, something to be discarded when it was no longer needed. I didn't know how to process it. The betrayal was deep, and the wound was fresh. But as I stood there, I realized something else, something that shook me to my core. This wasn't just about the house. This was about my life, my future, my worth. If I didn't do something now, if I didn't stop letting people take from me, I would continue to live this way, quiet, passive, invisible. I would continue to let them take, and I would always be the one left cleaning up the mess. But how could I confront Ethan? How could I challenge a lifetime of being overlooked, of being the person no one took seriously? Not even my own brother. Could I even stand up to him after everything? Could I stand up to everyone I didn't know? But one thing was certain. I was done letting my past dictate my future. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was a journey I had to take, because I couldn't live like this anymore. I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, standing there in that empty house. The weight of years of unresolved conflict with Ethan hung over me like a cloud. But as painful as it was to face, I realized that this was the turning point. This moment, the realization that I had been overlooked, taken advantage of, and betrayed, was my wake-up call. The anger that had simmered in me since I discovered my brother had sold the house wasn't what drove me now. No, this was something deeper. This was about taking back control, not just over my home, but over my life. I had let people walk all over me for too long, including Ethan. I had always been the one who sacrificed, who gave without asking for anything in return. And what did I get? A piece of paper saying my childhood home had been sold while I was working, leaving me with nothing but the emotional scars of a family that had slowly, steadily broken me down. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I didn't need to be the one who always gave. I didn't need to apologize for wanting something for myself. Ethan might have been the one who took the house, but I was the one who had allowed myself to be walked on for years. I was the one who had allowed him to think he could get away with it, and that had to stop now. I couldn't wait around for Ethan to realize what he had done. I couldn't keep wishing that he would suddenly grow up and understand how much I had always done for him. The truth was, I had waited long enough. Now it was time for me to act, to take control of my own life, to reclaim my power. I picked up my phone and dialed Ethan's number again. But this time, I wasn't calling him to ask for an explanation. This time, I was calling to take back what was mine. His voicemail picked up as it had before, but this time, I didn't leave a message. Instead, I set my phone down, staring at the empty house around me. There was more than just this house to reclaim. I needed to start making decisions that put me in the driver's seat of my own life. I walked out the front door, closing it one last time, leaving the empty house behind. I wasn't going to let Ethan or anyone else define who I was or what I was worth anymore. But I knew that this wasn't just about confronting him. This was bigger than that. The thought hit me then, sharp and sudden. What if there was more to Ethan's betrayal than just the house? What if this was part of a larger picture? Something I had been blind to all along. Ethan had always been the one to get by without ever really working for anything. And yet, here I was, working myself into the ground, taking care of everything, while he seemed to coast through life. The house wasn't the only thing that had been taken from me. I had spent my entire life feeling small, invisible. It was time to change that. That evening, I took the first step. I started making calls. I contacted a lawyer to understand my rights about the house. I reached out to people who might help me trace the money from the sale and figure out how my brother had gotten away with it. But I didn't stop there. I started investigating something I had been too afraid to look at before. Ethan's company. It wasn't something I had ever thought about in depth, but the more I sat with the idea, the more it made sense. Ethan had always been the face of the company, but I had been the one who quietly held it all together. We had inherited it together. And yet, in the background, I had always been the one doing the work while he took the credit. But what if I could leverage my role in the company? What if I could expose just how much of the business was built on my efforts, my strategies, my skills? The thought sent a thrill of adrenaline through me. I could take control of this too. I could make sure I was the one in charge, not him. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my power, my future. I had spent too long being passive, too long letting others decide my fate. But now, it was my turn to write my own story. I took a deep breath as I sat down in front of my laptop. I began drafting emails to the board of the company, to the employees who had worked with me all these years, and to those who would listen to the truth. I wasn't going to let this moment slip away. I wasn't going to let Ethan think he could keep everything he had taken from me. As I typed out my first email, something inside me shifted. The fear that had held me back for so long started to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, burning certainty. This was my moment. This was my fight. And I was ready. The idea was simple. Expose Ethan. Take control of the company. Make him realize that I was the one who had always been the true force behind our success, and that I was no longer willing to be overlooked or taken for granted. But the execution needed to be flawless. This wasn't just about confrontation. It wasn't just about having a heated argument or throwing around accusations. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to strike where it would hurt the most, where it would have the most impact, and where Ethan couldn't escape it. I spent the next few days doing something I had always avoided researching. I dug into Ethan's company records, analyzed its financial statements, its market standing, and the contracts that had been signed. I even went as far as to contact a few of the employees who had worked with me and were still with the company, carefully gauging their loyalty. There was more than one person who felt underappreciated. Just like me, I wasn't alone in this, and that was the power I needed. I also consulted a lawyer who specialized in business disputes. I didn't want to rush into anything without understanding the legal ramifications of taking action against Ethan. I had to be sure I was on solid ground. The lawyer explained that, since I had been a co-owner of the company, I had the right to request certain documents, access board meetings, and even demand a fair share of the profits. My quiet contributions over the years had made me more valuable than Ethan had ever realized. I smiled to myself as I listened to the lawyer explain my options. For once, the control was in my hands. I had the power now, and that realization, that taste of freedom, tasted sweeter than any victory I could have imagined. I crafted my plan carefully, step by step. First, I would confront him directly, no more tiptoeing around his ego. I would make it clear that I knew everything, the house, the company, everything he had tried to take from me. Second, I would present my case to the board of directors, revealing all the ways I had contributed to the company's success, ensuring that I would be given full recognition for my work. I wasn't going to let him continue to ride on my coattails. Third, I would request a redistribution of the company's shares, ensuring that I would finally have the power and control I deserved. The final step, I would make sure Ethan was left with nothing but a bitter taste of his own greed. But as I mapped out the strategy, the gnawing question in the back of my mind remained, would I feel fulfilled? After executing this plan, revenge had never been my style. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who tried to avoid confrontation. But now I had to fight for everything I had ever been denied. I had to make sure Ethan understood the weight of his betrayal, not just in words, but in actions. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that this was not about destroying him. It was about reclaiming my place in the world, about showing him and everyone else that I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me again. As the plan started to take shape, I realized that it wasn't just Ethan I was confronting. It was the parts of myself that I had ignored for so long, the parts of me that had been quiet, passive, and afraid to take what was mine. I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew that I had to follow through. This wasn't just about getting back at him, it was about setting things right, about reasserting my worth, and ensuring that no one would ever have the power to steal from me again. So, I prepared myself for the confrontation. I rehearsed my words, my delivery. I had to remain calm, collected, and focused. I couldn't afford to let my emotions get in the way. I was ready to take what was mine. I was ready to make him see that I had been here all along, quietly building, quietly contributing. And now, it was my turn to take control. The day had come. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way to the board meeting, the weight of everything I had worked for, the plan, the evidence, the years of unnoticed sacrifice pressing down on me like a heavy cloak. This was it. There was no turning back. I had spent days preparing for this moment. I'd mapped out every argument, rehearsed every word, every move. I knew that if I was going to confront Ethan, I couldn't afford to show any weakness. I had to walk in there with the confidence of someone who knew they were right, because I was. And this time, I wouldn't allow myself to be silenced or dismissed. The meeting room was set up with a long, polished table, the board members sitting at the head, looking at their laptops, their phones. But when I walked in, everything changed. Their attention immediately shifted to me, and I could see their eyes flicker between confusion and curiosity. Ethan wasn't there yet. That was the moment I needed. I placed a manila folder on the table. In front of me, filled with all the evidence I had gathered, financial statements, employee testimonies, proof of my contributions. I had spent so much time quietly building this case, and now it was time to lay it all out. As I began speaking, my voice was steady, calm, and firm. I know many of you are familiar with my role in this company. I've been the one handling strategy, working with key partners and securing major contracts. And yet, despite everything I've contributed, I've been kept in the shadows while Ethan has taken all the credit. The room was silent as I continued. Today, I want to make sure that all of you understand the reality of what has been happening. Behind closed doors, Ethan has been making decisions without consulting me. And today I found out that he sold our childhood home without so much as a conversation with me about it. But that's not just a personal betrayal. This is bigger than that. I turned to the board members, keeping my voice even but firm. I've contributed my expertise, my time, and my effort to this company, and I haven't been given the respect or recognition I deserve. I demand that my stake in the company be officially acknowledged. that I have the right to make decisions, and that I'm treated as an equal partner not just in name, but in practice. There was a long silence in the room. The board members exchanged uncertain glances, and Ethan finally walked in, looking surprised to find the meeting already underway. His eyes darted between me and the others as I continued. "Ethan," I said, my voice now carrying a weight I had never allowed it to hold before. "I don't need to prove myself to you anymore. You sold the house. You thought you could get away with that. But what you didn't know was that I've always had more control than you realized." I paused, letting that sink in. Then I revealed the final piece of my plan. "I own your company now, Ethan. You've been running it under the assumption that you were the one in charge, but in truth, I've always had the majority of the shares. And today, I'm claiming what's mine." Ethan's face drained of color. His smug, entitled smile faltered as he processed what I had just said. The other board members looked stunned, unable to hide their shock. "I'm here to take control of what's rightfully mine," I continued, "and to make sure that from this point forward, you'll never take anything from me again," Ethan stammered, his voice shaking as he tried to regain some semblance of his usual composure. You can't do this. We built this company together. I cut him off. "No, Ethan. You built it on my work. You took what I gave, and you never once thought about how much it cost me. But now it's over. I'm done being invisible. Done being the one who gets walked all over. It's my turn." There was a moment of silence, the weight of my words hanging in the air. And then, one by one, the board members nodded, some of them even shifting uneasily in their seats. No one spoke, but the approval was clear. I looked back at Ethan, who now stood there, helpless and exposed. I wasn't interested in seeing him crumble. I wasn't here for his defeat. I was here for my victory, for my future, for the life I had allowed him to take from me. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," I said quietly, my voice colder now. "But I've fought for everything I've ever had, and I won't let you steal that from me again." Ethan stood there for a moment, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. But I wasn't interested in his response. This was my moment. This was my victory. As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The anger, the hurt, it was all still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had taken back what was mine, that this was only the beginning of my journey.